Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. In this episode, I'm going to look at the music and legacy of one of my favorite bands, Killing Joke. Everyone who knows this channel knows that I'm not the biggest fan of pop punk, but that does not mean I do not like the fusion of melody and aggressive loud music, and nobody in my opinion does this better than Killing Joke. Killing Joke is a pioneering British band whose fusion of post-punk, industrial, and gothic rock has left an indelible mark on music for over 4 decades. With their explosive sound, politically charged lyrics, and apocalyptic themes, they've influenced everyone from Nirvana to Prong to Metallica, while remaining fiercely independent and relentlessly true to their vision. And you know, it has been a bumpy road over the course of their career, but it's within that chaos that the band has often thrived. Chaz Coleman was born in Cheltenham, UK, to an English father and a mother who was half Bengali Indian. He was very interested in classical music, and he actually studied violin and piano. And he did not begin listening to rock music until he was a teenager, when he was introduced to the music of Can by a classmate. Soon after that, he auctioned off his violin, bought some keyboards, and moved to London. Now, at first he started playing in kind of various reggae bands, and this was also during the time of the great British punk explosion, 76, 77. He would eventually hook up with Paul Ferguson, who was a drummer, guitarist Geordie Walker, who had never played in a band anymore, but convinced Coleman that he was in fact the best guitar player, and bassist Martin Glover, who just went by the name Youth, and Coleman himself would sing and play keyboards. Now, they were all squatting in Notting Hill, which, unlike now, bringing up images of Hugh Grant, in the late 70s, that neighborhood was not nice at all, and it was a seedy one full of drug dealing. Now, the band fully formed together in June 1979, and of course this is at the height of the post-punk renaissance, with bands like Pill, Wire, The Fall, Joy Division, Swell Maps Magazine, Gang of Four, and The Ruts putting out really incredible albums that year. Now, the band came up with the name Killing Joke, and it might be either kind of like a gallows laugh, or you're laughing in a terrible fate, or maybe it's about a joke that just makes people laugh themselves to death. But they had a manifesto, and they wanted to make a sound that would define the exquisite beauty of the atomic age in terms of style, sound, and form. Now, they would create a sound that was dark, noisy, and post-punk, but it would also have the influence of dub reggae and funk. Their first EP, Turn to Red, was recorded in August 1979 and was released in October of that year, and they did it on their own label called Malicious Damage. Now, the original EP contained 3 tracks: Nervous System, Turn to Red, and Are You Receiving? Now, the EP is less guitar heavy than the albums that followed this release. Nervous System is a very funk, reggae, and Pill influence, and it's got a Clash-like sounding chorus. Turn to Red is like a really fantastic dub reggae influence track, and with lots of echoey dub style production, a real kind of, I don't know, post-punk Lee Perry kind of sound. Are You Receiving is more driving and guitar oriented. The EP was also released as Almost Red, that included a song of the same name, which was just kind of like a remix of Turn to Red with tons of synth effects throughout it. Now, this is really good sounding stuff, but they have not yet established their sound. And their debut gig, they opened up for the Selector and the Ruts. During 1979-1980, they'd also play many shows with Joy Division as well. Now, John Peel was impressed with the EP and invited them to do their first Peel session, and the group actually got signed to Island Records, who in turn allowed them to keep that own label, Malicious Damage. They released the single War Dance in 1980 and Psyche that's with 2 S's, was the B-side. Now their cover was quite shocking because it shows Fred Astaire dancing in front of a battlefield with dead bodies. These songs really show where Killing Joke's sound started to develop. There are unique, intense riffs of Geordie, the tribal drums of Ferguson, the thumping bass of Youth. Now Coleman can both yell and sing melodically, and he adds always these cool swirling kind of keyboard sounds as well. And of course, this sound would further be realized on their debut self-titled album, released in October of 1980. Now, what makes Killing Joke different from other post-punk's band was the heavy guitar, which now was at the forefront. But it was not heavy in a hardcore punk way. It was actually heavy more in like a heavy metal kind of way. But don't get the wrong impression here. This music's also filled with like electronic funk dance grooves, but it's got a post-apocalyptic vibe, and it's got tribal drumming. You know, what was created here was the grandparent of like what we call like heavy industrial rock, of things like Ministry and Godflesh, that kind of noisy rock of Big Black, and the kind of alternative metal of Helmet and Prong. Now the album starts out with a pulsating synthesizer sound on Requiem before Geordie's heavy riff comes in. Again, it's heavy, melodic, and quite groovy. I don't know, maybe a heavier version of krautrock. Then there is another version of the song War Dance, and he's got strange distorted vocals, intense tribal drumming, a riff that uses great guitar harmonics, and just industrial sounds in the background. This heavy meeting of riff and electronics continues on Tomorrow's World, and Bloodsport has a kind of call and response between the keyboards and the guitar, a sort of pulsating Kraftwerk-esque sound that kind of permeates the whole song. Then there's this really heavy and minimal masterpiece called The Weight. This song would actually be covered by Metallica on their Garage Days EP. What is it's amazing in this track is that Geordie, he plays these incredible intense guitar parts, but he doesn't do anything like a conventional solo. He just stays on that riff and brings it out to the ultimate intensity. The incredible driving Complications is after that, and then you've got the slow plodding, very experimental S036, and the album closes with Primitive, which starts with a really great funky bass rhythm, and then the guitars kick in. I mean, this almost sounds like 90s indie rock. On the US version, they get the bonus track, Change, which is very groovy and dynamic, and Jazz Coleman's voice goes through like this echoey dub effect. You know, Killing Joke's debut is one of my favorite rock albums of all time, and if you want to get into Killing Joke, this is the album to start with. It was actually one of Dave Grohl's favorite albums as well. Now, the band gained a reputation for their really, really intense live shows. Whether crouching behind a synthesizer or up front on the mic, Coleman would exercise his demons, and he started painting his face in black and white makeup. One person who was really watching these shows and enjoying them was Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin fame. He described their music as out of this world, and he saw them as a kind of a relief from the weak-sounding synth-pop bands at the time, and they toured both the UK and Europe during 1980. Now, Killing Joke would go back to the studio to make a follow-up album, What's This For? And that was released in June of 1981. This album has a tense, kind of claustrophobic sound. While not quite as heavy as the debut, it does show the band pushing a lot of really cool experimentation. It starts out with the intense tribal sounding The Fall of Because. The song would actually be an inspiration for a band to name themselves after. This is followed by the heavy, yet incredible danceable song called Tension. Elements of tribal drumming, groovy bass, heavy rhythmic guitar, and intense melodic vocals come together perfectly on the track Unspeakable. Then there's great distorted vocals and almost like a disco electronic sound on Butcher, but not really disco. I mean, it's disco through a dark goth post-punk vibe, and you get more of that disco Kraftwerk sound before heavy guitars and tribal drums kick in on the track Follow the Leaders. A noisy funk industrial sound is on This Is Madness, and it's this great bass on that track. And then there is the track Who Told You How, which is just industrial noise and tribal drums dominate. Then the album ends with the intense melodic and rhythmic exit. Another incredible album in the books. The band had a unique style very different from any of their peers, and you couldn't really notch them into a specific category. They toured the UK and Europe, but they also got a chance to tour North America, and they even played at what was called the Police Picnic, which was a festival where the Police headlined in Oakville, Ontario, Canada. Now, 1982 was an interesting year for Killing Joke. They did some touring of North America later that year and played 2 nights at Larry's Hideaway in Toronto. These performances were captured on a live album called Ha. The version of Psyche, which opens this album, is wow, unbelievably intense. The other tracks on the album are The Sun Goes Down, which would appear on the Birds of Feather EP, which would also be released in 1982. Panties Are Coming, which would be on the 3rd studio album I'm going to talk about shortly. Take, 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 I think only appears on the Ha live album. Unspeakable and War Dance. You know, this album captures the sheer intensity of their live performances. But before any of this happened, we got to go back to the beginning of the year. And they went into the studio to record their next album, Revelations. And that was recorded in Germany with producer Connie Plank. Now, he had produced a lot of krautrock bands like Neu, Kraftwerk, Guru Guru, among others. And the production here is definitely cleaner sound. The album starts out with The Hum, which has this great reverb guitar from Geordie. There's the catchy Empire song, which follows with great tribal drumming, and that would be released as a single. The echoey and dirgy We Have Joy follows. Coleman shows that he can sing melodically one moment and scream the next on that track. It's just awesome. Chop Chop starts out with acoustic guitar before becoming a very driving yet melodic song. This was also one of the band's singles. Strange chanting vocals are part of the Panties Are Coming, and then side 2 starts out with a very cerebral chapter 3. Driving Dissonance is just all over Have a Nice Day. Land of Milk and Honey is fast-paced and intense. Good Samaritan is subdued with light guitar and drumming, and Coleman's vocals kind of fill up the sound of the recording. And that's kind of the closest thing Killing Joke has gotten to a ballad. It's not a ballad, though. And then Dregs closes the album, and it's just got fantastic guitar and again that Jazz Coleman militant bellowing. Revelations is another solid album, and in my opinion this would be the last consistent album of Killing Joke's 80s catalog. But there were a lot of issues in 1982. As the album was finished, Coleman, he had become obsessed with the occult and Aleister Crowley, and he just decided to flee to Iceland because he thought a nuclear apocalypse was imminent, or that's what he told people anyway. Now, of course, this created immediate problems because they had been booked to play on Top of the Pops. Now, by playing on Top of the Pops, basically bands go up there and pretend to play and lip sync the actual studio track. So this is quite funny because you can see Paul Ferguson on drums lip syncing Coleman's vocals, and they actually placed a dummy behind the keyboards in lieu of Coleman's absence. And the dummy seems to be wearing a radiation suit, which is a reference to Coleman's paranoia about nuclear war. Well, after that fiasco was done, Geordie Walker, he joined Coleman in Iceland, and they got up to all kinds of stuff apparently. Now, Coleman states in a later interview he simply wanted to get away and kind of try and live off the grid for a while, which seems weird, right, doing it right after you release an album. And the Apocalypse Story was just a kind of front for it. Now, Walker and Coleman, they work with the Icelandic band Peyr, I think that's how I pronounce it, under the name Niceland. And they started as a record company, but it actually ended up just being a front for smuggling hashish into the country, apparently. Now, back in England, Youth and Walker would start a band called Brilliant, but Walker decided to join the other guys in Iceland, and then Youth, he quit the band. He'd go to work on it as a producer, and Paul Raven was brought in as the new bassist, and he would end up playing on the North American tour that included those shows that were on the Ha live album. Now, Raven had played in bands like, he started in a punk band called the Neon Hearts, this hard rock band called the Dogs D'Amour, and he actually played with Tony McVie from the Groundhogs in a band called Turbo. And his father was a folk musician, John Raven. But now Paul saw that he was going to have his big break playing with Killing Joke. Now, tune in to part 2, where I will look at how the band sound evolves and changes throughout the 80s and 90s. Thank you for watching 20th Century Music and Arts. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and comment. What do you think of Killing Joke? Thank you.